Hey there, this is Michael F Schein. I am the author of the Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers, published by McGraw-Hill. I am also the founder of Microfame Media. Today on the show, we are going to talk about why becoming a hype artist is your moral imperative, what religious cults, Basecamp, and Tony Robbins have in common, and what B2B businesses and all kinds of corporations can learn from Kim Kardashian and Captain Kirk.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Would you do me a quick favor? Send me a note on, you can DM me on one of the 4 social media outlets and tell me what platform. We really want to know, what platform do you listen to us on? Is it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts? Whatever platform it is, let us know. And what's more, why don't you tell us one of your favorite episodes and why you like that episode? Because I'm going to pick a random winner with a valued prize of about $1,500. So it's worth your effort. Why don't you do that for us? I'd really appreciate it. So let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, let's start here. Do you sometimes get in your own way when it comes to promoting yourself, your ideas, your products, or even your organization? The truth is that most of us have at some time or another gotten our own way. We've been at least a little shy about sharing our assets. We feel looking braggadocious or narcissistic. All the while, we might also be infuriated with people out there who are far less talented than us and doing way better. Is it possible to learn to speak the truth of what you or your organization is capable of in a way that deeply connects to your audience and draws them to you? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, your soul has been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some very real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. I'm talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, Grammy Award-winning artists, and a whole bunch of other people who are just truly fascinating, including today's guest, Michael Schein. And we'll talk about more about that, because in that show, if you want to find out more, we talk deeply about what creates a cult and what cults are and how they come about and how political things are being turned into cults and even products are turned into cults. It's just one of the subjects we get into, including punk rock and bands and a lot of other cool stuff. Simply go to dovbaron.com, find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. And, I want you to know that if you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's dive in. Let's strip it down, dive right in. What does it take to get attention? Well, as long as you don't care what kind of attention it is, doesn't take much, really. I mean, you just do something stupid and get your friend to hold the phone up while you do it. But is there a step-by-step strategic plan, if you will, a handbook you could follow to get the kind of attention you actually want or need for yourself or your organization? A handbook that lays out all the dirty tricks so that you can be A, aware of them, and B, so you can use them for good. the kind of attention that has people discover you and your wares. Well, what if I told you there is? Stay tuned, because that's what you're about to find out. My guest today is Michael F Schein. He is the world's foremost expert on hype. And now he's written the quintessential book on the subject, the Hype Handbook, 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. Michael F Schein is the founder and president of Microfame Media, a marketing agency that specializes in making idea-based companies famous in their field. His clients include eBay, Magneto, the Medici Group, University of Pennsylvania, Gordon College, University of California, Irvine, and LinkedIn. Those are just a few, including some others that we were talking about before we went on air, including friends of ours that we didn't know we had in common until then. His writings have appeared in Fortune, in Forbes, in Inc., in Psychology Today, Huffington Post, and he has spoken for international audiences spanning from the northeast of the United States to the southeast coast of China. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome my mate, Michael Schein.
Well, thank you, Doug. I don't know that I want to talk now with that. I don't think I could do myself more justice than that introduction. So let's just wrap it up.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. And we'll send this intro to your children so
Right.
that you can give a round of applause every time you walk into the room. So one of the first questions I like to ask my guests is, in the context of leadership development, which is really what we're doing here, what is the question we should be looking for answers to that we're not? Oftentimes we don't get the right answers because we're asking the wrong questions, particularly even in self-promotion or the promotion of our organization. So what is the question we should be looking for answers to that we're just not, from your point of view?
I think a really important question that may seem very basic on the surface, but that really isn't, is what does it mean to be an ethical leader? So you hear a lot of talk about values and ethics, and a lot of it is sort of that standard business, what you're supposed to say talk. But what I think is very interesting is I see a lot of leaders, almost all leaders, especially in the corporate world, going on LinkedIn and in their corporate meetings talking about values and ethics, and then just doing whatever they have to do out in the world. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think most of us are always trying to be ethical, but everyone is the protagonist in their own story.
Yeah.
And everyone creates a backstory as to why they are ethical. Adolf Hitler was the hero in his own story. If you talk to him, he was making Germany a wonderful place and saving it from corruption, right? So I think it's really interesting to explore what our ideas are about ethics and values and why we feel that way. So what does that have to do with this thing that I call hype?
Mm-hmm.
I have this philosophy that hype, which has always been considered a negative word, or in almost every community except for hip hop, and we can talk about that, it's the province of con artists and scumbags. And why would you have to hype yourself up if you really have the stuff, right?
Right.
But a lot of times you'll see people, it's a lot of pearl clutching. There are certain mass psychology principles,
yes,
that are completely amoral. They're neither moral nor immoral. It's just the way people respond. And a lot of times when you talk to people on the fringes or unethical people, they see the world as it really is. And so they don't really have the compunction to operate in a way that we know gets a reaction, gets attention. But a lot of times when you see more quote unquote professional people and you say to them, listen, this is sort of the way people digest information and get emotional, they'll say, well, we don't do that sort of thing. But then they'll do other things that are arguably just as morally dubious. Or even worse, they let the bad guys take advantage of that gap in attention to get an audience for really terrible ideas. But once in a while, you'll see people like ranging from Martin Luther King to Richard Branson to Warren Buffett who have a fantastic concept of what I call hype, but who also have a moral code.
Right.
And I just think that's very interesting. I think a lot of our ideas about ethical leadership are maybe misguided or not really thought out.
Well, you and I had talked about this before when in previous conversations, not necessarily in recording, but in our private conversations, about how there is a great advantage to being amoral, and if you can be amoral, you can leverage anything. But the ethical question becomes: can you be amoral, right? Can you be outside of that? And the answer for what I just heard from you is to really examine whether this is your morals, your values, or whether it's societal, whether it's, as you said, pearl clutching, rather than, you know what, this is just not okay.
I think that it's important to draw a distinction between being an observer and being an actor.
Right.
So, in the 19th century, Charles Darwin famously came up with his theory of natural selection, which basically said that, as we all know, organisms who outlive and outreproduce other organisms survive and pass on their genes. And there were all of these people in 19th century business who said that gave them license to practice what they called social Darwinism, which meant letting people live like dirt, and if they climb the ladder, they deserve to live, and if not. And what I would say is those people mixed up observing the world and observing reality and using it as a prescription. So unless you're a certain kind of person who is guided by certain religious beliefs, most scientists would say that the theory of natural selection is a fact, that it's reality. But you can observe that and then say, what does that say about me? I'm a human being who lives in a society. Is that the kind of world I want to live in? Is that a pleasant world? The fact that we've been able to create technologies and create things like money, which aren't real things, does that allow us to understand natural selection so that when we're creating a vaccine, we understand mutation, but also create a world within those parameters that we want to live in, and that's a warm place, and that so we don't have to live like baboons, right?
Right.
And I think it's the same thing. You can observe what mass psychology, how that works. You can say, okay, people are more attracted to adversarial points of view than they are to kumbaya, let's get together statements.
Right.
But you can then say, but I have a moral code. I don't want to deceive people, and I want to make the world a better place. So that means I'm not going to pick fights with human beings and troll them. I'm going to pick fight with ideas.
Right. And that's an important piece there. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about picking fights, because you and I have talked a lot about this before. Part of my personal philosophy is you must know your enemy, and your enemy is not a person. Your enemy is something that you want to remove from the planet, something that you feel is unethical, unmoral, outside of the bounds of decent human beings. And you want it. It's a hill you're willing to die on, is my term.
Yeah.
So, so the enemy was the opposite of civil rights for Martin Luther King, right? So, it's pick that enemy. And as you and I had talked about before, there's a lot of anxiety around picking an enemy because people have this idea that conflict is bad. And one of the things you talk about extensively in the book and really sort of hammer home, and I think it's a great point, is if you don't embrace the conflict, you're never going to stand out. But it's picking that enemy. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. So in my business life, so as you mentioned, I wrote this book, the Hype Handbook, which basically says, what are those principles, good, bad, or indifferent, that get people excited, that get people energized, and that attract attention. But in my business work, I apply those principles. I work almost in a consultative capacity with businesses and people to figure out how they can do that on their own. And I will often start with this principle because it's one of the most important. And I'll say, okay, we need to pick a fight. And what they'll almost always say to me is, I can't do that, because they won't say it like that. First, they'll say they're excited, but ultimately, when you really dig into it, they'll say, I don't know, I have all these clients. I'm in the insurance industry and I could really turn off X person and Y person and Z, and I can't be that contrarian. And, I often say, if you don't have a point of view that you think, a point of view, a product suite, a way of doing things that you're really against, respectfully, then you shouldn't be in business. Why are you in business?
Yes.
If you don't think there's a better way than what's already out there, right? And the other thing is, fortune favors the bold. I like to use music examples because I think rock managers and hip hop managers are some of the best hype artists ever. They got people very, very emotional, on large numbers of people, and got them to buy lots of records. And the Who, they were an R&B band. They played R&B covers, the early Who.
Yeah.
And then they met this guy, Pete Meaden, who said there's this new movement called the mod movement. That's this subculture in Britain. Yes. And they don't have a band of their own. They listen to Black American music. If we could be that band, there's tons of money for the taking, right? And originally the Who didn't want to do it. They said, we have all these fans who think of us as an R&B band. So then when they restyled themselves as a mod band, they lost 200 fans, but they became the Who. I mean, they fill stadiums. So that you got to be willing to maybe lose 200 to gain 1 million.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important piece in understanding what real hype is there is always the cutaway, the slicing off something in order to gain something else, in order to gain something, usually a bigger price. But, that old saying, we're stepping over dollars to keep pennies. And I think that's a very true statement in the sense of a fan base. And let's face it, and you understand this better than almost anybody, is business is about a fan base, particularly in the social media age.
No question.
It's what's your fan base? I mean, there are people who are famous because their ass is the right size. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of talent, but it's a fan base that makes that person $1 billion. That's what it is. And so that understanding of, well, I'll just wear the clothes that don't show that off. And I'll be demure. That's the word I was looking for. I'll be demure isn't going to get you those. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying it's that understanding of where is that gap, stepping into it, oftentimes at the cost. And I know, because I've done it myself. I've gone, I don't really want to lose those people.
Yeah.
But are they your people?
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And there's another layer to it as well. So when you talked about the ass being the right size, I mean, you're I think talking about Kim Kardashian, who is an excellent hype artist, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of listeners are probably saying to themselves, well, that's Kim Kardashian. She's in entertainment. She's famous for being famous. We sell a product, and it's in SaaS software. I mean, there's nothing I have in common with Kim Kardashian. Okay. But what you're referring to is she turned what some would consider a weakness, into a strength, you
Absolutely.
could say. Think about, I'll give you an example to show you that this can really work in any industry. So Basecamp is a project management software.
Yes.
About as boring an industry as you can possibly get. Important, but boring.
Sure.
And the dominant player in the niche still is Salesforce, and they won by completely changing the industry. They made the first cloud-based product, which was just a better product, so they won.
Right.
So Basecamp comes out, and the whole thing with Salesforce is it can do anything. You can have a Salesforce consultant to rewire Salesforce, so that it can integrate with anything, do cartwheels. It's this completely malleable thing. And what the guys from Basecamp did is they said, you know what, we're going to have Basecamp do, don't quote me on this, but 5 things. It's going to be ridiculously simple. And most people would consider that a weakness, but it can't do what I want. Why would I choose that over Basecamp, over Salesforce? So what they did was they didn't pick a fight with Salesforce. They picked a fight with the concept. They took their weakness or insecurity, what could be a weakness, not being able to do a lot. And they said, the way people are working in the modern era is all wrong. They rush around like everything is a disaster. They try to do everything for everyone. A client asks them to do something, they reconfigure everything. They say, if you want to work like that, we're not for you. We're for companies who prize efficiency, a 4-day work week, premium prices for a limited suite of things. And they picked a fight with that. And now that's the kind of company people will wear on a t-shirt. You know, they have a cult around themselves. And so these principles, whether you're Kim Kardashian doing whatever she does or a project management software, if you strip away the content, it's the same. Which is why I say it's neither moral nor immoral. It's just people are wired to respond that way.
So, you know, as we sort of move towards the end of this first half of the show, I want to talk about that because I know that's the essence of what you're doing, is getting to, this is just what people respond to. It's not, I like it, I don't like it, it's immoral, it's moral. This is what human beings respond to. This is what gets them going. So let's sort of talk about some of those things that people just are going to respond to. Because, you know, from my point of view, it's about, I've always said, your job is to get people off the fence. Right? Yeah. On your side or not on your side, but off the bloody fence.
So, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I chose the word hype on purpose, both for my book and what we teach in our company, because it's a word that is typically considered negative, but I've redefined it as any set of activities that get large numbers of people emotional so that they'll take an action. And the reason I did that was twofold. One was a hype strategy of my own. The gay rights movement did a really clever thing early on where they took the word queer, which was an insult. It meant you were a weirdo, that you were a deviant. Mm-hmm. And they reclaimed it and made it a positive thing, as if saying, this is just what it is. This is who we are. It's our identity, right? I don't want to put hype on the same level as that extremely important, you know, movement that has made people, has increased the whole of human happiness by leaps and bounds. But then again, I think something that really troubles me is that all of these bad guys, all of these bad actors are so naturally good at this. And the rest of us are being held back by this negative connotation that getting people emotional and attracting attention is a negative thing. And I want to say that it's your moral imperative to do that if you're producing good stuff.
Okay, so let's stop. I want to say that. I want you to say that again, because I think that, you know, people who are listening, they're on the treadmill or whatever, they might have missed that. So it's your moral imperative to,
if you're doing great work that makes people's lives better, it is your moral imperative to understand the mechanisms that get people emotional about that work so that they'll give it a chance. Because the bad guys already get it. The quacks, you know, the sociopaths pitching garbage, they tend to understand this stuff better. And we don't want to leave this power in their hands alone.
So it's your moral imperative to get people emotionally caught up in what you do if it's something that you believe is making a difference in humanity, is
making the world better, increasing the happiness of mankind, humankind.
Right.
Yeah. And so to answer your actual question, because I don't think I did, my experiment was I was going to learn everything I could about these quote unquote marketers who weren't marketers, because I found that the people who call themselves marketers are usually the worst marketers. And the people who call themselves, you know, founders of religions, rock band managers, circus advanced men, you know, these sorts of things are usually the best marketers.
Yeah.
So I said, are these people all over the map in how they operate? Because if there is, there's nothing I can teach people. That's just a knack.
Yeah.
Or are there common principles ranging, no matter what these people do, that tie them together? And I found that there really are. I mean, I read hundreds of biographies, looked at papers, interviewed people, and there really are 12 buckets that all of these, attention getting, emotional driving sort of strategies take over and over again. You see these 12 themes repeating with very, very, very little deviation from that.
Fabulous. So we're going to pull a couple of those out in part 2. We'll examine those. And one of the things I want to get into is, the changing face of entertainment, because those lines have blurred so much now. We used to have entertainment, we used to have business. Now we've got, what Tony Robbins said years ago, which was edutainment, right? It's an education, it's an entertainment, but now it's edutainment product, right? It's this combination thing. So I want to talk about, the entertainment business and how it is part of marketing. It is part of business moving forward. And I want to pull out a couple of those 12 and just go, okay, let's just hone in on 1 or 2 of those and get people to really get a grasp of maybe something they can do immediately. We're going to come back in a couple of seconds, in fact, in just 1 click away for you. But before we go, I just want you, Michael, to let people know where they can find out more about you, where they can find out more about your resources and all the wonderful things that you've got to offer.
Yeah, so I'll tell the whole swath. So the best thing you can do to learn my ideas, part of this is because I want to get the readership, but part of it is I really believe this, is to type the Hype Handbook by Michael F Schein, Schein, into Amazon and buy the book. I mean, that's my magnum opus where I give away everything, I've ever thought about this stuff. My personal website, my author website is Michael F Schein, Schein. Do not forget the F. .com, because there's another guy who owns Michael Schein. Forget that guy, but yeah. So MichaelFschein.com.
See what he did? He picked an enemy.
Yeah. No, I'm sure he's a very nice man.
Guy.
I'm sure he's a nice man. And then there's my company is microfamemedia.com. But yeah, the Hype Handbook on Amazon is really the best way to get my ideas.
Yeah, and I can tell you that I read it. It is superb. I highly recommend it. And of course, we'll place all the links into the show notes. We're going to be back in just 1 click. So till then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can redefine hype in your business and tap into it so that you can use the very things that the bad guys are using for the greater good of humanity. We'll be back in 1 click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.